Acting President. I will be brief. The Liberal Democrats will never vote for an increase in taxes or a reduction in liberty. This bill will increase taxes, so we oppose it. It's that simple. The government tells us that this bill is not about tax revenue. It's only a few $100 million, a drop in the bucket. We're happy to call that bluff. If it's not about revenue, then the government wouldn't mind reducing a different tax by a similar amount. You could reduce registration fees, lower stamp duty, reduce payroll tax, or abolish any of the petty taxes on everything from insurance to parking. If you did any of these things to offset the tax increase, then we probably could support this bill. But you won't do that. The government cares about every dollar it can squeeze out of taxpayers, and that's all they care about. This is a shame because there are many improvements that could be made to our taxation system that do not result in revenue increases. The Liberal Democrats recognise the value in efficient taxes. The best taxes cause less distortion in the economy, cost little to administer, and internalise costs that would otherwise fall on third parties. Replacing the existing stamp duty with a Georgist land value tax would represent an enormous economic benefit to the state, with no change to government revenue. Tax efficiency changes should be non-partisan no-brainers, but they're rarely considered because tax reform isn't sexy and won't sell newspapers. Now, the government has aimed this tax at the evil property developers, speculators and land bankers who are profiting at the expense of ordinary Victorians who only want to build a house or buy a house. While I have no doubt this kind of thing does go on, and it may be difficult to see the big picture across the entirety of Melbourne, but land banking developers become very obvious in smaller regional markets like Wodonga, it is wrong to single out the developers as the sole villains of the picture. Local and state government planning rules are the major culprit in limiting land supply and keeping prices rising. Many zoning decisions at the local government level are currently corrupt moves by councils to channel cash to developers. And giving the state government an incentive to cause windfall gains so they can tax them is unlikely to make things better. Many so-called windfall gains are only the market jumping to where it should have been if zoning hadn't held the prices down. The Windfall Gains Tax is not the worst tax imaginable, but Victorians already pay too much tax as it is. And imposing additional taxes on housing with no cuts anywhere else can only push up the cost of housing. There is no way that moving more money from developers to government cuts house prices. Without a corresponding reduction in taxes, we cannot support this bill. The tax breaks for build to rent are probably largely pointless. It probably will lead to a small increase in property available to rent to lower income earners. It is certainly no silver bullet lowering housing costs. We don't like sin taxes, so we're not really in favour of the Keno tax. We think you should be cutting sin taxes, not broadening the base. And separately, we have an issue with the removal of the land tax exemption for the gender restrictive clubs. This is going to impact women-only clubs especially, which we can only assume is a collateral damage in a virtue signalling measure. Or, if there is instead a wink and a nudge that only really applies to male restrictive clubs, it's an example of poor legislative practice and draws into question the integrity of the State Revenue Office Commissioner in enforcing this. More generally, I think that both women and men can sometimes have exclusive spaces without causing the world to end or derailing gender liberation. And if you wouldn't want to belong to a club that excluded the opposite gender, you can demonstrate your virtue by not joining the club. This just seems a little mean-spirited to me. I'll note that I do not belong to any gender-exclusive or gender-restrictive clubs, but then again, I don't think I belong to any clubs at all. In short, the Liberal Democrats will not be supporting this bill.